Ready to go? Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. My name is Saiful Behari. Thank you so much for letting me present today. I'm going to be going over how to craft an effective scientific poster and abstract, and I've been an assistant researcher at research assistant, at Houston Methodist Hospital under Dr. Ismaila for almost around 3 years now. So the first things we're going to go over are abstract creation and submission. I'm going to go really in depth and make sure you guys are going to be able to go from a nothing to a full submission ready abstract, all the steps and feedback steps you'll have to do. I'm going to be going over poster design as well in Microsoft Slides and what other softwares you can use and which ones would be the most effective. And lastly, I'm going to go over how to make figures, as they're some of the most important parts of any research paper, abstract, or anything research related. So what is the difference between an abstract and a manuscript? So a manuscript is going to be much more long form. It's the things that you see in a research paper. If you go on Google Scholar and look at any research paper, those long form 8-page long papers, manuscripts, right? The goal of an abstract is to shorten that manuscript and provide just the amount of context needed to understand what your study's goal was and what your study found. So much shorter, and there's some small differences between formatting between them as well. So here, more in depth about abstracts. So an abstract compared to a manuscript is going to be only made up of 6 sections. You have your title, your background, the objective or hypothesis, the methods, your results section, and your conclusions and future directions. So a major difference here is going to be your background section. So normally in a manuscript, you'd want to make an introduction to kind of bring your reader in. Here, you just bring a background for an abstract, as you don't really have that much room, and you're going to need to condense all the information that you got from that 8-page long research project, into only a couple paragraphs. So let's go piece by piece and break down how to make an effective abstract with each of these sections. So first off is the title. So there are some couple titles that you can work with. There's clear and descript, results focused, methodology, something catchy or novel. It really depends on what kind of research you're doing. So a clear and descript title is good for most research, but it's especially effective in something that's observational or retrospective. It's very direct, and the results are usually, it's really good for papers where the results aren't super in one direction or the other, and maybe it's difficult to get that translational application currently. So when we have a results focused title, it usually means that our results are really positive in one direction or another. You'd use this title when you have some dramatic outcome that is not expected, and it's a way to kind of tie your reader in. So next, you have methodology focuses. So usually you would use a methodology focused title whenever you have something that's really novel, especially in how you collected it. So that could be something like a new way of doing gene analysis. If that way shows similar results to the current standard of care, you would use that methodology, especially inside your title, to explain why it's so important and why it's so critical. And lastly, especially if you're going for a presentation where you're speaking orally, something that's catchy or novel would be really good. Something that grabs the reader and makes someone who's walking around in a poster presentation conference look at yours and say, wow, it's really interesting. So here's some examples. So here we have our clean and descript example. We're not saying exactly what's happening, right? TRT promoters and TP53 mutations change immunotherapy outcomes, but we don't know by how much. So this is good if our results aren't super skewed in one direction or another, and they require some nuance. Our results focus section is going to be if we had some dramatic increase or dramatic change, right, for our title. So here we say TRT promoter and TP53 co-mutations are associated with poor response. So if that response is really strong and it can have like clinical outcome today in current research, that's when we would use that. And going on to methodology focus, if we were using some unique form of genetic profiling that gave us interesting results, we would definitely use that in our title, right? And then if I was going to be performing this presentation in a conference, speaking about it and wanting people to come up and look at me present, I would maybe pick something a bit more catchy. The TRT and TP53 axis, right? Kind of a bit confusing, mysterious. You want to see what's continued on in the rest of the title. The genomic signature of immunotherapy resistance in hepatocellular carcinoma, So yeah, that's going to be something novel, and you want to grab the reader's attention. So now we have a title picked out depending on our study. We're focusing on writing our background. So the background has to be super concise as we don't have that much space for our abstract, and space on abstracts also depends on where you're submitting your abstract, which I'll get into more later. You want to make it short, avoid long sentences about things that are unrelated, and you want to identify a gap. So what a gap is your research works to solve some sort of problem, and a gap is a problem within healthcare. For example, if we have this disease that not yet has any form of treatment, but this study shows that this right here could possibly be a form of treatment, we would provide some context about that and make that into our background. So some examples of that are here. So we see in our effective background, we're talking about immunotherapy or immunocheckpoint therapy is effective in this cancer. There are these mutations that can help us change or see what mutations would affect immunotherapy outcomes, and also give us kind of background on when we should use it and when we shouldn't. And it's not really well understood yet. So this study is working to define that and hopefully turn that to something clinically applicable. So notice here, we're not talking about results or conclusions, or we're not adding things from our other sections. This is purely just giving context to the reader on what the issue in the field is currently. It's not too long. It's very discreet. We have flow with our sentences, and it's overall well made. Now, an ineffective background, it's much less professional. It's kind of broad. It talks about appellation and surgery and tastes and things that aren't related to immunotherapy. It doesn't really define a gap in care, and it doesn't really tie to the end of our goal. And it adds subjective things like understanding these pathways is important for cancer biology and shows results. Like, we don't know what results have been shown yet. This is just the background, right? So next, we're going to be writing our hypothesis or objective. So when we have a hypothesis, it's going to be more aimed towards a study that's kind of novel, something where we don't really have a lot of research showing progress in this area. This is something that is brand new, and we think this is going to happen, but we're not sure. Now, an objective is more when a study has already been shown in other areas to work, and we're more so trying to find the efficiency, right? So we're confirming our results in this study, and we're seeing what is the clinical benefit and how could that be applied. So some examples of that. Here we have our objective statement. Our objective was to compare progression-free survival between these patients on standard of care treatment versus this new treatment. So we know that there's research for this treatment that shows it's effective, but we want to know how much more effective is it in standard of care. So it's an objective. We know it's going to be beneficial for the most part. We just don't know if it's worth implementing. Now we have our hypothesis. Now there is research on IL-6 levels and associating with complications in operations, but we don't have direct data yet to prove this. So we're just kind of getting a very informed guess on what we think will happen, and we're using hypothesis in this case because it's very novel and new. So now that we have the statements out the way, we move on to our methods section. So this section is really important, especially for defining your own importance compared to other studies. So method section, you're going to get a lot of questions on if you do present. So make sure that you're as specific as possible. Include your study design, where you got your data, how your data wasn't analyzed, and what variables specifically were analyzed. And if there's ethics involved, ethical concerns, make sure you have ethical approval and explain that in your methods section. So be as descriptive as possible, but obviously don't go too long because abstracts usually have limited amount of words. So some examples of an effective methods section is something that has a clear design here, tells you some amount of patients, only 3,000 adults with this disease, were treated with this from this time to this time. We checked BCLC stage, AFP, prior surgeries. So we're specifically stating what variables were included in our study. We're transparent about our procedures. And at the end, we mentioned that we got ethics approval, right? Now in our ineffective methods section, there's no specification. It's unprofessional. There's pretty vague criteria, and there's no ethical confirmation that everything here is approved. It just says everything is approved, but you want to make sure that you're as descriptive as possible in your methods section. It's one of the most important and scrutinized portions of your research. So now we have our results section. So this is really what determines the merit of your research. So you want to spend a lot of time on this. So Results section, a lot of people will get really excited about the results and try to include conclusion inside the results and try saying this result is really good because results is mainly meant for direct results. What you got, what numbers did you get, objective data, no subjective opinion. So when we're looking at this data, we also want information like statistical significance. And this is also where we're going to have our figures, which I'm going to go into more depth later on. But yeah, results section, we have an effective example here. We have our statistical significance included. It doesn't have any interpretation. We are very clear in our objectives and clear in our data and what we found specifically. Specific values, numbers, that's really the main goal here. And you'll see in our ineffective results section, things were unprofessional. They weren't very clear. There was no exact numbers on how much or how well the patients did, and everything was pretty subjective. Now, the main thing you'll know in almost all of these ineffective sections is being vague. Specificity is really one of the most important aspects of writing an abstract paper. If you aren't specific in your words and in your work, you're going to get your abstract rejected. So definitely be as specific as you can within word limits. So lastly, we have our conclusion. So conclusion or future directions, you can combine them usually, is going to focus on interpreting your results and saying, what can we do in a future study, or why is this clinically relevant? So it's really important that you spend time on this as extra as well, because this is what tells people who are looking at your poster just at a glance, where is the benefit coming clinically? A lot of things people do as well, common issues I see with conclusions is overstating. People will see a drug that increased outcomes or objective rates of, let's say, survival, right? And they'll say, well, so because we increased this by 5 months, or the subjective rate of receival of the medication, that it actually led to change in outcome. Because this increased by a certain number, let's say like 5 months or something, they think that their data is, revolutionary, is going to cure the disease. Well, it's not. And in a lot of conclusions, they'll overstate their work, and it kind of creates an issue because their subjectivity is put into question, and that makes the rest of your work a lot less clinically positively looked at. So that's something definitely to be careful of, is whenever you're making your statements on clinical significance, get that punch, that line that says this is important because of this, but don't overstate what your significance actually is. Right? So now that we're moving on to some examples of that. So here in an effective conclusion, we're saying that these mutations have shown association, therefore there could be some clinical benefit by including them into treatment decision-making. It's clear, it's direct. We're saying where it specifically helps, and we're not overstating by saying it will fix all the issues of clinical selection of drug usage. Now, in ineffective conclusion section, again, we're very generic and vague. There's not really professional wording used, and we just say that they could be used in future directions. We're not stating exactly where, and it honestly just sounds like filler. It's not something that you would expect to see in a well-made abstract. So next, now that you have all these sections of your abstract combined together, you're going to put that all in a document, separate them out like you were seeing here. But one of the most important things for any abstract submission is reading the abstract rules. So I'm going to get into that in a little bit, but some general guidelines you can follow are making sure that you include your authorship. So whenever you do have, I think it's this next slide, yep, here's an example. You'll see here that you have the names of the people who worked on this paper, and they're going to be in descending order from the most to the least work that the person did. And you'll also see at the top numbers. So these numbers correlate to your place of work or your education. So it's important that you include this here as you want to get cited in the paper that you worked on. Also, you'll see that we have at the very end an asterisk. So whenever you are working with your PI, you always include them at the end of your authorship section and have an asterisk next to their name. So that's just a little bit of formatting information. Going forward, you'll also see that every lab does have its own styling and every conference has its own abstract rules. But in general, you're going to want to both keep narrow margins and to justify your papers. You'll see here the margins are very small. That is just generally what most professional conferences expect from their abstracts, but they'll usually say that inside their rules. And you'll also notice how this background here, it's kind of not aligned where the words are not spaced. So you'll see there's no space in between them. It's all lined up. This is called justification. So whenever you align your words, you can align them in the center, to the left, to the right, or you can justify them. In almost all papers, you'll see justification as the main source or way of organizing your wording. So moving forward, after you finish all these formatting checks and you make sure everything is good to go, you're going to want to make sure you're planning ahead for your abstracts. So a lot of times abstracts will release conferences will release their abstract calls like only a month or 2 months before the actual event. They'll start advertising. The issue with this is research takes a while. So you want to look in advance and see what conferences, on their website, what conferences are going to be available, look at past conferences times and see when should I start my research and will I have it finished in time to make an abstract. Some examples of this, NCCN, and I have some other cancer organizations that have hosted conferences, and you'll see their dates are very different and the deadlines are always different. Another thing is they constantly change the times. So you'll start with a poster and it says, October 21st in 2026. And that was, 2 years ago, they said that. And then afterwards, when 2026 comes around, they changed the deadline to something like a month before. So always make sure to check those abstract deadlines while you're working on your project so you don't miss them and you can finish on time. So now that you have made your abstract and you're within the deadlines, you can go and scan one of those links, and here's one of the NCCN abstract calls. We're going to click Submit Abstract, and when you click that, you're going to see this. So this is for multiple different poster presentation conferences, but the main thing is that they're all different, right? So when you submit your abstract, the amount of words in your abstract and the style of your abstract is all going to depend on where you're submitting it. So before you start your abstract, always make sure to read the instructions of the abstract submission regulations, right? I've had many personal situations where I was trying to write my abstract and I had everything ready. And then I go and I look at the guidelines and I'm under 200 words or I'm over 1,000 words, something like that. And I realized I have to start from the beginning because this group wants this many words, this group wants this many words. So formatting issues and size issues are one of the biggest reasons why papers get rejected or abstracts get rejected. Be careful of that and definitely look at these beforehand. So now that you know what the rules are and you make sure they align, you'll also notice a lot of abstracts require payment. So here you'll see there's an administrative fee for NCCN just to submit your poster or your abstract first off. Submitting that abstract, you'll have to either pay yourself or usually your lab will compensate you, and you have to make sure you're communicating with them and explaining what the prices are, so that way there's no confusion. As you can see, they can get pretty pricey, from $60, and attendance costs upwards of $500 for some of these conferences. So after you've submitted your abstract, check your email, check your email, check your email. You always want to keep checking because they could send you a poster and it can go to your spam, or your poster acceptance and your details for how to make the poster could go to your spam, and you'll have no idea until the deadline's already passed to submit the poster, right? So always check and make sure that your emails are being read daily to make sure you don't miss something important. So when you do get that email, it'll look something like this. So here you have acceptance, and they give you specific poster size, formats, fonts. They're very specific with poster sizes, and if you get something wrong, you won't be able to bring your poster or present your poster. So be sure to read these before you start any poster creation. And now that we have our abstract accepted and we're getting into poster creation, what exactly is a research poster? So a research poster is just going to be a visual version of your abstract, kind of made more for reading on the go or people walking around and looking at your poster and then walking away. It should be able to be read in less than 5 to 10 minutes. So it might need to be shorter than your abstract, or in some cases longer. It really just depends. Now, a poster section-wise is only one section different than an abstract. Same title, background, objectives, methods, results, and conclusion/future directions, but you're going to add an acknowledgments and references section. And I'm going to talk about this more later on. So now when we're turning our abstract into our poster, we want to make sure that everything flows correctly. So in an abstract, everything is, part by part, it's all labeled out for you and it's all in one Word document. So it's hard for things to not be in order. But whenever you're working on a poster, you can get a little bit more liberal with your designs and how you make things flow, but be sure that everything makes sense when you're reading it. If you have your conclusion and your introduction next to each other, that's going to be very confusing for a reader, and that's most likely going to dock you points if a judge is looking at your poster. So first thing whenever you start designing your slide is to check your dimensions. I've made posters, for a whole day, and I come to look at the submission form and I realize I did it in landscape when it was supposed to be in portrait, and I have to redo the whole thing. So always off the bat, make sure you go to design on your PowerPoint. If you're using PowerPoint, go to slide size and set whatever slide size the conference you're working with recommends. Same thing with font. Font sizes are usually pre-given. Sometimes they won't be. I'll talk more about that in a little bit as well. If they're not given what you should do. But yeah, set those dimensions. And oftentimes conferences will also tell you what software to use. Now, I do recommend PowerPoint just because it is the most widely accepted, but Google Slides also works, and they're interchangeable conversion-wise. Now, other ones exist like Canva, and you can use these, but I would just, if it's your first time making a poster, I would stick to Microsoft PowerPoint. It's the most classic. And as you advance more, you can look at more advanced forms of poster creation, but these are very good. So now that you've chosen what software you want to use for your poster design, you have to look at what actual design are you going to choose before you put words or anything like that or figures. What design am I going to use? So oftentimes labs will already have formatting pre-made for you. So an example of that is right here. So we have Methodist. They provide a couple different types of posters with different colors and different methods and results sections. The important thing here, though, is they're not always going to be templates for the exact size you're working on. So sometimes whenever you do switch your template over to a certain size, it'll be congested or will look compressed, and you have to go into the format template and edit the exact words or the exact titles, so that way you look more professional and it doesn't look like you just threw stuff together. So yeah, definitely be careful of that. So now let's say we have picked our format for our poster and we have a template. It's the right size. We put all our abstract information in, right? Now, what we haven't added yet is figures. So you'll include figures as well in your abstract submission. And in your posters, they're even more important. They're visual. They show us what exactly we're looking at. And they're the easiest way for someone to understand just from a glance what your poster is about, especially if you're working on something that is an oral presentation. You're going to want to make sure that your posters are have very high quality figures. So I recommend BioRender, Microsoft Slides, or Google Slides for these, or RStudio, depending on whether you have kind of something you want visual clearance on the understanding of a concept, or you want to show results like in the form of a graph or numbers. That's going to be RStudio. And in BioRender, they have really good visual graphics for understanding. So here I have an example. In BioRender, you can just type in the word protein translation, and it gives you all these cool graphics that are really descriptive and you can use in your designs. The one thing I'd be careful of is that you do, one, need to pay for it and buy the licensing if you want to use it in a publication. So that's something to be wary of. And two, you also need to make sure you cite BioRender. So the question now is, if we're going to be citing our figures, how do we cite something with no title, right? So that's where figure descriptions and names come in. So whenever we're working on a figure description or a name, you want to make sure that you have a title like figure 1 or figure 2, it's fine. And then you explain exactly what the person's looking at, right? It may seem redundant, but it's important, especially when those descriptions are general understandings might need to be cited from a different paper, you have to include those citations in your acknowledgments and references section. So acknowledgments and references section is just going to include any references you used for the creation of your figures, or any outside groups that were helped you in the creation of your poster or your laboratory work, and also includes any disclosures you might have. For example, I'm going to talk about it later on, but if you work for a company that would benefit from research that positively shows the company's work, or a drug, for example, it's pretty often what's the contradictions entail. You're going to have issues. So you have to always declare, where do I work? Are there any contradictions in my that might make me bias? Things like that. So here are some examples of very effective figures. So the first one here, we have all of our words. They're not compressed, and they all look or they're within the poster size limit. So a lot of people will forget that the word limit also goes for figures as well. So they'll make really small worded figures, and it's almost impossible to read if you're standing 4 or 5 feet away from a poster board. So be careful of that. And you'll see here as well, we have a figure description that is very clear. We say exactly what type of graph it is, what it's recording, and who is being recorded from it. So ctDNA and pancreatic cancer. This is clear, objective. There's no confusion whatsoever. Now, an ineffective figure is going to be kind of compressed. You see it's hard to read and doesn't look as professional. We have a description that just says patient count, which doesn't really mean anything, especially when you have words like SOT and HSCT. Sometimes people will know these words in advance, but you can't expect everyone to know every single abbreviation that you use. You have to explain if you do use an abbreviation. So because of that lack of context, this figure would not be very good for a poster. So lastly, when you add your figures, you add all your posters, your abstract converted to your poster, and you have your section on acknowledgments written down with all of the acknowledgments you might have, or contradictions, declarations, all of that. Make sure your formatting is right. So same concept as your abstract, you're going to want to justify all your text and line it up as well as you can. You're going to want to make sure that the text that you do have as well is the same font and its font size is readable. Sometimes you're not going to have those guidelines for font size, and what you'll have to do is just look at your poster, step back a couple feet and see, can I read this? If you can't, then your font's too small, and people won't strain and get a magnifying glass out to come and read your poster if it's not readable. Another thing to be careful of is alignment and issues with visual presentation. Whenever you're working on a poster on your computer, it's only like 1 by 2 feet, maybe if it's a bigger computer. A poster can be up to 4 feet long. So that magnification will make any errors you make much more obvious, especially to a judge. So that's something really to be careful of. Another thing, lastly, to check for errors on is your authorship. So you're going to have the same authorship as in your abstract, the same asterisks on your PI, and you want to make sure those associations are there and they're accurate, or you can get in big trouble. So yeah, just watch out for those errors. And here's kind of an example. I would say this is definitely still an effective poster, and it really depends on where you're doing your conference at. They have different requirements. But there's one thing that I think most posters should have that is not here, and that would be a references acknowledgement section. So here we don't actually have any references that are needed to be made, but in general, it's important to keep that open and show that you don't have any, rather than have the reader assume that you don't have any. So also, you'll notice that we cited figure 1 inside our results section. If you do have a figure in a separate section of its own, make sure that you cite it in your corresponding section. Another thing to look out for is, for me personally, when I was writing figures and making posters and stuff like that, I would make these really elaborate designs, and I would have figures in different places and results in different places. And I thought it looked pretty interesting, but the problem was it wasn't flowing. So it's really important that your figure numbering and your wording and your organization flows with the rest of the paper. So here you see we start from background, our objective, the methods, then we're getting to figures, we're looking at our figure, we go to results, and then we see it kind of flows down into our future directions and conclusions, and it makes sense. A lot of times, if you have things like figures and methods and background, mixed up together and not in some flow or order, it can be hard for a reader to understand what's going on, and it can also be just confusing in general for the average passerby, not necessarily just a judge. So yeah. Next, when you check your poster and you feel everything is perfect, you have to print that poster and bring it, right? There are two main ways of printing that most conferences use. Either you pay them a certain amount, which usually is upwards of $100 to print your poster, and you come pick it up and then bring it day of, or you would print your own poster and bring it. So it depends on the conference, and when you submit your poster, be sure to check if they send you an email on submission of printing materials or when you can pick up your poster. They will email you and confirm everything. Just be sure to know that so you don't show up on that the day of your conference and don't have a poster ready. Another thing is always, I keep saying this and stressing it because of how important it is, make sure that poster is perfect when you go and print it. I've had friends that they finish their posters and they print them out and they check and they realize, I forgot to put error bars on this figure, or this doesn't have a period on it, and I have to go back with marker and change things in the ruler, and that's really stress-inducing, and I wouldn't recommend it. So if you can, always try to measure twice, cut once, make sure everything in your paper is clear and concise and looks good for your poster before you submit that, so you don't get into those situations. So now that you've printed your poster, it's presentation day, you worked really hard on it, don't mess it up with a bad oral presentation. So not all poster presentations will include an oral presentation. Sometimes you'll just submit your abstract and your poster, but when they do require a presentation, you want to make sure that you remember everything about that poster, all the outside extraneous details, because they're going to ask you questions, and especially questions in your methods and your conclusion section. Those method sections are very often ripped to shreds by judges and are scrutinized just to understand better what you did and why what you did was effective. So definitely make sure you know everything that you possibly can about your poster and you come as prepared as possible. But sometimes you won't know the answer, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Well, it is, but it's okay. If you don't know the answer to a question, the best thing to do is not just to say, I don't know, and move on. Oftentimes, if you don't know, don't pretend that you do and say something wrong. Just tell them that you are not sure currently, but probably will work on a future, study or work to understand that concept that they're explaining better in a future publication, something like that, to show that you're interested in learning more about what they're saying, and you're not just saying, I don't know, I don't really want to know either, right? So the last thing as well is to dress to impress. You want to speak with confidence. You've done all this work and you have all this knowledge. You don't want to mess it up by having the judge question your abilities because you are dressed just averagely or like you just came back from a party or something. I have friends who dress like they're just hanging around whenever they go to their lab or their presentations because they believe their work will speak for them. And very rare cases that is true, but oftentimes it just is a bad look for you and your PI. So definitely make sure you dress well whenever you come and present, if you have to present. And yeah, thank you so much for letting me present today. And I hope that gave you all the information that you needed. But are there any questions? If not, that'll be it. Thank you so much. And I hope that was good.
Thank you, Saif. Really
That was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, of course.